I am Alessandra Venturini, the holder of the chair Jean Monnet European Migration Study. I'm very glad today to open the second lecture of the seminar Mineu, that's mean driver of migration in the European neighborhood. And I'm very glad to welcome today Matteo Villa, who is a senior research fellow of the ISPI and co-head of the ISPI Data Lab. The ISPI is an important, very important research center of international relationship in Milan. He's a data person, so he also was co-chair of the task force G20 on global health and COVID, and also member of the task force for migration. He is not an economist. He is graduate in social science, political science at University of Milan. So for that reason, probably has much broader vision than just the economist. He's worked in many fields. He's was edited the geopolitical atlas for Treccani. He managed the Rasta News, many projects of FP7, and he specializes in global governance, governance for health, migration integration, and also statistical modeling in European politics. And not last but not least, energy, because now this is a very crucial field. So I stop this presentation, otherwise we go too long. And Matteo, I give you the floor, please. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Alessandra, for this broad presentation, but also, you know, you can expect I'm not an economist, so it might be shallower. So up to you to judge after this. No, but jokes aside, you will see that my presentation is filled with graphs. Let me just share. Yeah, it should be right? Okay, so
here, no? Perfect.
Very good. So thank you so much. In the 40 minutes that Alessandra gave me, I'd love to, you know, give you a broader overview of what's been happening in this field, you know, international protection in the world. Alessandra told me that she often stresses that, you know, refugees, international protection are just a very, you know, a small share of the total of international migrants, and we'll see that in a bit. It's important to contextualize that, and especially it's important always to remember that irregular migration, which often is necessary to get to accede to international protection in, for instance, Europe, is actually mixed migration, and most of the people who move do not move in search of protection just by that, you know, right? So we always have to remain focused on that. But at the same time, given that it's, you know, irregular migration that is the focus of this lecture, together with international protection and refugees, I want to show you, you know, what's been happening in the world, what happens in Europe, and then maybe, you know, if I manage to focus on a few policies in Europe and the paradoxes that, and some paradoxes that give rise to these policies give rise to, and especially some, you know, some unconventional thinking about that, especially the Dublin regulation. And I'll show you what I mean in the second part of this. But first, let me start from the beginning. And so, what's been happening in the world? And remember, this is not to scale, so left and right, as you can see, at different scales, and also different timelines, because we have very good data. Slightly good data, I mean, sufficiently good data to describe what's been happening in terms of migration in the world since the 60s. And we know that the number of international migrants has grown. And you might also know that I'm a bit cheating, because of course, the number of international migrants has been growing together on par with the population of the world. So the share of international migrants in the world has not changed that much. It actually increased from 2.5% to 3.5%, which means 96 people in the world do not move across borders and frontiers. Of course, again, this doesn't mean that migration pressures are the same all over the world, right? So most of these people who move, they move from the southern part of the world towards the northern part of the world. And so in Europe, on average, we have 12% as foreigners and descendants, first generation of foreigners. So it's not 3.5%, but it's 12% of immigrants. That said, so we know that this trend is quite continuous and quite linear over time. Differently, in refugees terms, instead, we have, since the end of the Cold War, we've seen two different trends, very, very starkly different. We have both the decrease after the end of the Cold War and the return of the number of refugees, even though, the Balkan wars were changing a bit the scenario, giving rise to new refugee waves, and remember African civil wars especially, and some wars in South Asia giving rise to different other ways. But since 2014, I guess we can see that the world has changed markedly, both due to the Arab Springs, and their effects in the MENA region, but also because, as you can see, the Venezuelans diaspora has increased a lot. And finally, we are starting to see the effect of the Ukrainian crisis onto, in 2022. So it's the last number of the lot. So you can see the two upticks in refugees, which are now, almost double, if we include Venezuela's, almost doubled in 1990s. And this is just to show you that not just the new crises have arisen, but also that it's very hard, and it's getting harder and harder to come to a close on ongoing crises. So people who have been displaced remain displaced for longer, right? So I don't know, just thinking about the Syrian crisis, 12 years and counting. Of course, the Afghan crisis, 2001, different refugees, and now again, the Taliban back again, and some people fleeing the country, not that many, but some. Or just thinking about Libya, again, chaos for years, Yemen, chaos for years. So protracted crises are here, and unfortunately, they've been on the rise. And this means that the number of people in need of refuge and those that qualify for refuge has increased. But still, if I take this 40 million, I don't know if you see my mouse. Can you also see the mouse? Okay, yes, understand.
I think you've seen the mouse.
Okay, I put the 40 millions here, we will be here, right? So compared to the 280 millions, we're still, a small share of the total, even though it's important to remember that it has more than tripled since 2006 and doubled since 1990. Okay. And for context, always remember that we're talking about this share, right, of people that have been displaced from conflicts, and also, again, we can include asylum seekers and those that the UNHCR think are in need of international protection but have not accessed neither. But we're not looking at IDPs, so those who have been displaced within the country. Usually, in terms of shares.
Sorry, IDP is internally displaced people.
Sorry, yes, internally displaced persons, which means sfollati in Italian. So those who have been forced to leave their homes, but are in a different part of the country and did not leave the country where they were born or they were citizens of. Usually we say IDPs are 2/3 compared to 1/3 of refugees. Instead, as you can see, in 2022, the proportion had changed slightly, but significantly. It's almost half of the population that's abroad. That includes 8 million of Ukrainians, okay? 5 million of which are in Europe, and 3 million of which are in Russia. They're including the UNHCR figures, even though the 3 million who are in Russia are facing very different conditions, and some of them are most likely forced refugees, meaning that they have been evacuated, but sometimes brought to Russia through force. We don't have the right proportions. Most likely, the majority has gone to Russia by will. We don't know exactly the, how cared for are they. There is a gray zone there, so I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty, but this increased the size of refugees compared to IDPs for the first time, and it gets them almost half of the whole of forces placed in the world. But remember, usually it's 2/3 the ones we don't see because they remain in their country of origin, and the 1/3 is the one we focus on. And for Europe, that's even different. The reality is even more a bit different. Here you can see the irregular arrivals by sea to Europe across time, the past 13 years. And what you can see here is that there is something that goes off the graph, and that's the refugee crisis of 2015-2016, as you might remember. I show you what happens when I show you the scale of the crisis in a second. 1 million people came to Europe in around 6 months, most of them concentrated in just 3 months between August 2015 and October 2015. So remember, that was really a displacement that is similar to the size of displacements that happen when conflicts break out in countries, like the number of Syrians that went to Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan in the first few years of the conflict, or actually the first few months of the conflict. But still, you can say, I wanted to first show you the general trend, which has been, take away the 2015 one and just look at the orange line, which is the average over 12 months. As you can see, there's been a stark increase, but I mean, such a sharp increase, but a linear increase over time. And now we're seeing again arrivals going up from numbers that even when they touched the minimum in 2020, were still at almost the maximum in 2010s, right? So just look at the 2011 crisis, small crisis. It was mostly Tunisians going to Italy. Okay, 2/3 of that flow were Tunisians going to Italy after their spring in the country, and that maximum there is now the minimum in 2020, and now again we are on the rise. So something has been changing in irregular arrivals. Still, look at the difference between the irregular arrivals today and 2015 in this slide, right? So the real actual crisis that maybe shaped our response over the past 10 years as Europe has been there. And now the arrivals by sea are very different. If I compared this crisis in 2015 to the one from Ukraine, you will see different figures as well. So in just a few months, we've seen, I think that in a month, we've seen more than 1 million people crossing from Ukraine. So it would be of a different scale and magnitude, even more than the sea arrivals here, right? So monthly, we've seen at the peak 230, 240,000 migrants arriving to Europe, mostly to Greece, right? That was a matter also of concentration and the place where they arrived. Islands on the Greek peninsula. So it was very different from the Ukrainian response, and we'll talk about that. Anyway, just put that in scale, but also remember that even the 2015 crisis was a crisis that is difficult to compare. I mean, it's possible to compare to other refugee crises in the world, but it was the only crisis in Europe, take away the Ukrainian one, in which we can really compare the flows. Even in 2015, usually I ask my students when I'm live, I don't tell them this story in this way. I tell them, look at what happened in 2015 and so on. So I prime them to look at Europe in 2015, and then I show them this slide of refugee flows from a country to another. The yellower they are, that's the starting point. The redder they get, that's the arrival point. And when I ask them what changed between 2003 and 2015, of course they tell me, well, Europe has changed, but the truth is, if you look at it just a bit closer, African refugees, and so flows of African refugees within Africa had increased by a lot, And if I compare them to flows to Europe, they were actually higher within Africa, even in 2015, even as we as Europeans experienced our biggest crisis before the Ukrainian one. Okay, so we should put that into the context of the global context of global displacement. Okay, Italy. Now we're shifting a bit, right? Sea arrivals, it doesn't mean refuge or looking for refuge. I just want to show you another trend just for Italy, because I think it matters also when we reason about irregular migration today. And just to introduce this topic, but then I just leave it there for a second. So we've seen different crises, right? And when I was already here, I think in 2011, I wasn't talking about migration. I wasn't studying migration at all. But I remember the crisis in 2011 for sure. Alessandro remembers it as well. This was the biggest irregular arrivals crisis for Italy in a while. And in order to actually, it originated the first diplomatic crisis in a bit between Italy and France. You remember it was Berlusconi in Italy and Sarkozy in France. So center-right governments, they were slightly allied. But that was the first Ventimiglia crisis, the first crisis in which the border between Italy and France got closed for years. And I think the first time after the Franco-Italian agreements on borders, on how to manage border police in the 90s. But anyway, that was the first one. And still, it was totally uncomparable to what happened for us, right? In this period here of high departures from Libya. So this was mostly a Tunisian crisis. 2/3 of those who arrived in Italy were Tunisians who then wanted to get to France. So that was, the reason for the crisis. And Italy, in order to manage it, actually did something that then never occurred anymore, which was to distribute temporary permits to move freely within Italy, in the hope from the Italian government that they would go to France. But then this, of course, was a problem for France, because there was,
Yes, Italia was just a transit country.
It was in the end. It was just a northern Mediterranean transit country, just like so like Libya is a southern Mediterranean transit country in that case. So yes, while in this case, I mean, we'll see, Italy has also been a transit country, but we had to, start and then try to improve the reception system that has never taken off in Italy in order to cater to for the inflow of so many irregular arrivals by sea over those years. So it's about 500,000 people in 4 years. Okay, and then as you can see, there is this stark drop. Remember that this drop, you can see, just to remind you, in 2018, 2019, we had a different government. We call it green-yellow government. So we had Salvini from Lega as Minister of the Interior, but remember that Salvini cannot really account for this drop from 2017 to 2018. Most of the drop from this high to almost this low happened before June 2018, so before Salvini came to government, and before he implemented the closed ports, we could say, policy. He said this himself, and it actually was because of an agreement with Libya, right? So an informal agreement with Libyan militias not to let people depart or to bring them back by the so-called Libyan Coast Guard, which were often the same militias being offered almost the same deals, for what we know. But still, sharp drop in arrivals. It continued throughout these 2 years of green-yellow government, and then it picked up. And this pickup, it's interesting, it picks up right after the pandemic. Okay, so we have the first real pickup right after the pandemic, the second real pickup right after the Ukraine invasion. And you can see it quite linearly in the end, but also we thought that we had arrived at peak of around 80,000 before the Ukraine crisis, and then that started again. So what happened here is that we had, just to remind everyone, many Tunisians and then many Egyptians coming to Italy in this period, which means that the flows here are a bit different from the flows down here, in which they were mostly sub-Saharan Africans coming from Libya. Okay, so in here we have mostly a crisis of sub-Saharan African coming from Libya, from other countries in Africa, of course, Western Africans or Eastern Africans reaching Italy. While in here we have a regionalization of irregular migration, mostly, where we have many Tunisians, many Egyptians that cross into Libya and that come from the eastern part of Libya to Italy, and many people coming directly from Turkey to Italy. You've heard about the tragedy this Saturday. They were part of that route that was almost closed before. Until 2020, less than 4,000 people arrived from the Ionic route, as we say, so directly from Turkey to Italy, while over the past 12 months, 16,000 people have arrived from this route. So, I mean, out of 105,000, they are not anymore irrelevant. So a regionalization of irregular migration, Tunisia, Egypt, and Turkey, instead of sub-Saharan Africans, which still make up quite a bit of the flow, but they are not anymore the majority. Okay, that's what happened. Okay, again, to contextualize the debate and go back to refugee in Europe. So Italy says we are the first countries of arrival, and it's true, of an increased flow. The others should help us. Well, it's true, and I'll show you two graphs to contextualize that. It is true we are the first countries of arrival. It is true that Italy needs to pay for first reception costs, and sometimes even reception costs over some years. It is also true that Italy is not the country where the refugees tend to stay. Bear with me. Of course, this is just a part of the flow because, as we said, irregular arrivals are composed of many people, like, for instance, Tunisians, Egyptians, who will not qualify for refuge. Okay, so of course you can see just a blimp, and of course just a part of the problem, and this is the protected ones. Okay, so refugees. I will not get too much into the details, but remember that refuge in Europe, in this data, even subsidiary protection is counted. Okay, not humanitarian protection. Okay, so anyway, if we look at this,
can I just make a comment? At the beginning, Italy was not ready for this arrival, and they were used just to irregular migrant, illegal migrant, and to ex-post legalization of the migrants. So at the beginning, they were treated as irregular migrant, knowing that Italy was a transit country, and the regular migrant was arriving. They were taking care of them, and when instead the asylum procedure was coming, they were telling the people, tomorrow we will take you the fingerprint. In this way, you legalize the position and you can apply for asylum. And this was the signal for leaving Lampedusa and the south, going to the north, because these people didn't want to stay in Italy. They want to go to the north. At the railway station of Milan, there was a special service built up by the church, of course, but also by the local government, of support of these people, because they tried to take a train to make a journey on the north. So that means that the complexity of the asylum policy in Italy was also part of this being in the 90s and without knowing, without designing a country, becoming a country destination. And in 2015, Italy became a country where a lot of people was arriving, asking for international protection or in search of international protection without having known this before. And as Matteo Villa is showing clearly, the inflow the previous year were very small. So there was a shock and all the critique, and all the shock also for the country, for institution, was due to this unexpected event, because the inflow increased by 10 times, even
Yes.
more. And this is make the institution not ready.
Totally. And this is important because we can criticize the response, but we always have to remember where we're starting from. So we were starting from a system that was not built for this. And I would say, yeah, of course we can have institutional paralysis, political problems that, makes it harder to cope. But in the end, I would say no system can react in a ordinate way, ordered way to such a shock. Actually, as Alessandro was saying, in 2014, for instance, and 2015, the average fingerprint rate in Italy was 35%. It means 2/3 of the migrants were not fingerprinted upon arrival. And then this changed to Italy was saying, well, there are too many. We cannot really manage to fingerprint them all. And it was an excuse, and I'll show you why. In September 2015, the fingerprint rate was 35%. And as soon as we agreed upon the package of relocations, we'll talk about it later, but relocation, it meant Italy was getting helped to get asylum seekers out of the country in a legal way, 35,000 of them, but Italy was requested to fingerprint them all. Well, in a few months, by January 2016, the fingerprint rate was up to 88%. So of course there was an informal policy of aiding people to go where they wanted to go in Europe.
Management policy, no?
Yes, that's it. Informal management. Okay. So anyway, going back to we'll go back to it in a few minutes. I just wanted to tell you, to show you where the other countries come from when they tell Italy yes, we can help, but we're doing a lot already. Look at the percentages of refugees hosted in each new country. Well, Italy is certainly not among the top rate. Also remember that, of course, these are not comparable in any way to the refugee percentages in neighboring countries across crisis. For instance, in Lebanon, we know 25%, Jordan, 15% of the country, almost 20% is refugees from Palestine and then now Syria. This is not comparable, and luckily so, but anyway, Sweden was already doing a lot, right? As by taking in migrants, even between 2015 and 2020, that were coming already from Italy in this irregular way. Germany, 1.5%. Where did they come from? Of course, Greece from 2015, and apart from Italy. So, and even France hosts more refugees than we do. So, we can ask for help, but we need to know where we come from and how we're perceived. Even if we look at asylum requests, over, for instance, in this case, over 2 years. Well, compared to the population, Italy is not among the top asylum requests receiving. It increases a bit, but it's still further from being, Germany or even Greece. And so, of course, this makes us in an uncomfortable position in which we know that the system needs to be reformed legally, but in the end, now we are in this kind of suboptimal equilibrium that in the end, it doesn't penalize that much Italy. I'll show you why. Anyway, this is the context. Okay, just I open up this parenthesis and I'll close it in a second. Irregular arrivals. Sorry if there is a part in Italian, but you can see this is from the start of the Meloni government to today, almost today. And this is Sbarchi in Italian means sea arrivals to Italy. And this is how many the NGOs rescued. Just to give you a comparison, last year, the percentage of rescued people from NGOs over the same period last year was 20%. This year, it was down to 7%. And yet, sea arrivals to Italy have doubled. There is, of course, this doesn't mean that NGOs are not a pull factor per se, because you have to go and have a look to Libya itself. NGOs only operate in the Libyan search and rescue zone. So just off the Libyan coast, and not off the Tunisian coast, not off the Turkish coast. So we have to go and have a deeper look there. But if you look at estimates of daily departures from Libya of migrants, incredibly maybe, but can be shown why, it doesn't seem to be the case that NGOs change the number of people that depart daily from Libya. It's mostly weather conditions that change it, and then also the yearly trend of whether smugglers are helping or not, and there is more request demand to depart or not, and so on, but not whether NGOs can get there or not. It's quite easy actually to understand why. NGOs are very few. Okay, usually there is 0 or 1 or 2 operating off the Libyan coast. Okay, compared to the number of people that make it by themselves the journey to Europe, even from Libya, that's just a small amount. And so that's why most likely we don't see such a huge effect of NGOs. And yet they're also the easiest ones to target, because usually they are politicized. So they are a good target for a political government. And at the same time, so they tend to be, left wingers, not all of them. Some of them operate very moderately, very attentively, and they try to cooperate with the Italian government, even in these conditions. But some of them are highly politicized. And at the same time, on the other hand, they are the easiest to be spotted, right, and publicized, because all the other arrivals are autonomous arrivals, or maybe rescued by the Italian Coast Guard, just 12 nautical miles from the coast, so very close to our coast, and they of course cannot be brought back. So they are the easiest part of the flow to be pointed at. But of course, it doesn't solve the problem. Again, the Meloni government came, and in the same period compared to last year, arrivals doubled. They were close to 20,000 by now, and now they are 43,000 in the same amount of time. So, and they are not slowing down. Okay, it's not like the trend. It's Meloni came, and now we have this curve that was increasing already by itself, and now it's slowing down. No, it's actually linearly increasing. It's a problem for the government, because of course they could have said, well, we're reaching the peak or a plateau, and now it's going to go down, but it's not yet. So it doesn't respond to political conditions to Italy, this kind of irregular arrivals flow. I would just show you how the Italian government has tried to deter NGOs from coming, even in the face of judicial failures, meaning that the other attempts to limit NGO operations have been challenged by courts, and effectively so. So one attempt is to tell NGOs that do a rescue to do just one, and then go head to an Italian port. So yes, they will disembark to Italy, but we will choose which port to, right? And they are getting further and further away from Lampedusa, so the place near which they operate. Not even Sicily. This is each crisis since 2020, and as you can see, for years the normal ports were Sicilian ones, so 200 nautical miles from Lampedusa. And then Lamorgese, at the end of its period, already started this practice. It then declined, and then Piantedosi improved on it. So 3 times as much time spent to reach Italian ports in the north, and then, of course, another 4 to 5 days to get back to the Libyan SAR zone, search and rescue zone, which means less NGO activity, as we've seen. Alessandra, you wanted to add something?
No.
Okay, and then let me tell you, this is again just a very small part of the irregular arrivals conundrum, because NGOs are a small part of the total, as you see. And so let me give you just the last part to go back to refuge and reflect upon it. This is the inevitable paradox of any asylum system in Europe, for instance, that follows international law. You can only apply for asylum once you reach the country. And of course, not all people who would qualify for asylum, like Afghans, can come at the same time to any country, you cannot really empty out a place, right? For instance, Afghanistan. So what happens is you usually have, I mean, you always have to reach the place of refuge and then ask for refuge. And this brings us to the last tragedy on Saturday, which again, this is not an ethical condemnation of what happened at all. I'm just saying, look at the obvious paradox of this fact. Most of the people that were on board were Afghans. The Afghans are usually highly protected. Oh, now that they were highly protected in Italy, this was somewhat of a unicum in Europe before the Taliban in 2021 took power. But then after that, everyone in Europe is protecting at a very high rate Afghans. 98% in Italy, 98% in Germany already. Germany had been, just to give you this aside, had been one of the least protective of Afghans before the Taliban took on in 2021, because between 2015 and 2020, they had received a lot of requests from Afghanistan, but they thought that even though Afghanistan was not a safe country, it cannot be really labeled as such. Kabul, the capital, could be labeled as a safe city. And so they were trying to, reject most of them and return as many as possible. So Germany was not really a great country of refuge for Afghans, but now it is. Again, comparable to Italy, to France, to Spain, everyone is protecting at 95 to 100% rate the Afghans, and yet we do not protect all the Afghans, of course. Just to give you a figure, we estimate that there are around 400,000 Afghans in Turkey. Well, those that reached Italy over the past 12 months are, I think, 3,000 or 4,000. Now, maybe 10,000. Sorry, the last 12 months, they might be 10,000. So, of course, they are just as more share of those who are in Turkey. So this paradox will always stay with us. We know that we protect only those we see, and we know that we cannot protect too many, right? Just to reflect upon this normal and obvious paradox of international protection. Finally, I think I have only 5 minutes, right, Alessandro?
Matteo, sorry, before going to the EU policy, could you explain to me, but I'm sure that all the students will be interested to this, the High Commissioner for Refugees, when they decide to protect someone, they do this because the country where they plan to resettle already accepted these people, let us say. As we know, the High Commissioner of Refugees in general resettled in the United States and Canada. 90–80% they resettled there, which are far from the
EU now is increasing, but yes.
Sure, yes. But but I always wonder, they resettle people that they decide that they need international protection, or because the country of destination, like for instance, in Germany now, we know that the Syrians receive immediately the international protection. And so if you can resettle Syrians from Syria to Germany, they don't do it, but anyhow, we know that the Syrians receive international protection. So how they do this? Because you see, the Afghans are far from all the country, and so the High Commissioner of Refugees could play an important role. But I wonder if they are independent or they are just an administrative role of the state where the migrant will be resettled. Let us say is like they are like an antenna close to the area for the United States government, for the Canada government. Have you ever understood how they work? This is, for me, is the mystery.
Actually, you should go and ask Filippo Grandi for each of the single, because actually it's a bit different, but from what I know, for instance, for European countries, usually, first of all, UNHCR needs to be in the place and be doing a census of those who are, refugees in need of protection. So it needs to be allowed in the country. It doesn't operate in Afghanistan. So it does operate in Turkey, for instance. it knows, it collects and requests places of resettlement, right? So there are commitments from each country in terms of quotas, and usually UNHCR has a process of, you know, waiting list and also selecting the most vulnerable. Canada is a bit different, but I'm talking about the UNHCR process. I think that Canada actually manages itself, not through
Yes,
UNHCR.
they are an antenna. Fundamentally, they
Exactly.
are an arm,
Exactly.
an antenna
They
from
can
the
help.
country.
They can help in pointing. For instance, Italy actually selects the most vulnerable, while Canada selects the most able. There's
Yes.
also, yeah, there's also an important tricky point there, right? Canada only resettles people. Of course, they are so far away from everyone else, they can manage that, and yet they use this point system to understand which refugee will most, they say, will integrate, he will or she will integrate best, but in the end they actually
There is
contribute
always
to the
this
brain
debate.
drain.
Yes, there is always this debate. Anna Triandafilidou is always mentioned that the Canadians are convinced to be very clever in integrating people. Yes, because they select to let
Exactly.
inside only the one that has very high chance to integrate.
Yeah,
So very chapeau.
exactly.
It's very easy to integrate the people that don't need help.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
So
need
just to,
minimum
yeah.
help.
So anyway, I think it depends on what mandate we give them. So for instance, in Italy asks UNHCR to help, and then they send usually church
Yes.
church attendants as well, from the Christian and the from the Catholic and the Valdese, for instance, church, and they go there as well to try to select the people as well. But I mean, it's a I think it's a country by country process, and each country decides whether UNHCR is more or less of an antenna or more participant of the process.
Thank you.
Okay, but that's, I mean, I have limited knowledge of this. I only know Italy and slightly Germany. Okay, that's that. Now to the EU, I'll try to be brief, so maybe I skip this part. I just want to show you, sometimes it's easier for Europeans to agree on whom to protect. Sorry, the premise is we don't have a European Asylum Agency, right? We do have it on name only since 2019 or 20. The EASO is now called European Asylum Support Office is now called European Asylum Agency. So somebody could say, oh, great, we have an agency. Yes, we do. But in the end, the asylum process is still national. And as you can see, sometimes in Europe, we do agree. So you take the average and you look at the protection rates, and Eritrean citizens were fairly well protected already in 2015 by everyone. I should go back and check in 2020, this changed. But already you can see from Somalis, you have Italy that protects a lot, and then many other countries who do not. So the average 60% protection rate, it can go from 100%, well, I mean, let's say 90% from those who have significant numbers like Italy, down to 40 to even 20% in France. Okay, and have a look at this. For instance, Ukraine in 2015, the year of the crisis, the first crisis, but not of our now let's say collective response. U28, just a quarter of them were protected, with Italy again being one of the best countries in terms of protection, but also many countries not protecting them at all, right? 0%. Got a postponed decision.
This is also due to the traditional labor migration policy.
Very exactly. Look at Poland.
In Italy, had a lot of Ukrainian workers, and that is also pushing the decision to accept addition.
Absolutely. For instance, Poland decided never to give any refugee permit to any refugee protection to any Ukrainian in that crisis, and instead said we will give 200,000 work permits to them. So they managed it differently.
But in Poland, the Ukrainians do not need a permit because they have this temporary transition, so they can stay 3 months without any card.
True. They only emitted these 200,000 for longer periods. It's true. They also
Yes.
they can also come and work for 3 months and go back in. It's true. It's
So this is also the reason why Poland, who is the country where there are more Ukrainian refugees, let us say now, or resettled people, is not granting any citizenship.
yes.
But just
Because in
because of,
2015, now it is the policy has changed, of course, given that Russia is implied. But anyway, just to give you the sense, even Albanians who tend never to qualify in the EU, yet Italy tended as a policy, if Albanians apply for asylum, to give them some protection in 2015, which is again, I mean, simply a matter of it's not harmonized both at the top levels and at the very low levels sometimes for some countries, given the tradition that we have. Okay, so if you are Albanian, it's better if you apply for asylum protection in Italy.
this is very strange because the population of Albania is half of the population of Albania is outside, half in Italy and half in Greece. In Italy, we have the highly skilled. So we have students, Albanian students, a lot of workers and so on. They're very well integrated, the Albanian. So it's very strange that you find somebody
but it's
looking
also
for
a self-selection process, meaning that most Albanians in Italy do not apply for asylum. So only
yes.
those that so only those that apply in the end up in this figure of 40% protection. Maybe they're
Yes.
like 300, I don't know. So just to give you the sense of the scale of the problem of harmonization, but in the end, of course, any decision is a personal one. Okay.
Because you have also to understand the size of the country. Albania is a small country. I was shocked when I was much younger because the professor with whom I work, he will say, we make a big story. We can take them all. There were 3 million. Italian are 59 million, 3 million more
Sadly.
doesn't make any difference.
Sadly.
And at that time, it has not so clear the idea of the size of the country. And instead, Ukraine is a very large country with a very large population. The situation is completely different.
Absolutely. Even now, Albanians are 2.8 million, less than 3 million. So let's say a large Italian country, Italian town, not more than that. While Ukrainian, as I said, 40 million, it means like Spain. And given that we know that 8 now have left the country, it means that 20% are out of the country. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Large need to change. I have to try to finish, but I wanted to just show you the last thing on Dublin system. So we talked about the dysfunctional Dublin system, and the dysfunction is interesting. Look at what we were proposing, because sometimes we fail to remember another rule of Dublin. Okay, so the status quo is this one, and the 2020 proposals were here. And as you know, in the Dublin system currently, we don't have any relocation of asylum seekers. And in the end, even though it's it's not really the main rule, it ends up, actually it's the final rule of the Dublin system. It ends up that first countries of arrival like Italy, Spain, and Greece are the ones formally responsible to receive and process the asylum seeking requests. Instead, the proposal here is to do a mandatory relocation with continental solidarity. But there is a second rule that we never focus on. That is, Dublin rules means that if you are responsible to take back the person, there is actually time limit for you to be responsible for them, which is 12 months currently. What does it mean? It means that if France finds a person that arrived from Italy and they find a fingerprint, now finally we have many, so we are taking many, so the Dublin requests are increasing. They still have to return that person to Italy within 12 months since they found it, her or him. Otherwise, the responsibility shifts to France. Okay, we never talk about this. And now, so for instance, the proposal is to bring this to 3 years. right? So Italy should take them back within 3 years, not just one year. Why is that? I want to show you why that is so. Let me go to this. Okay, these are the number of requests that every country has sent to Italy. Like we found 75,000 people here that were, that should go back to Italy. Okay. Oh, sorry. This is not actually requests. This is actually transfers. Sorry. So you have outgoing requests and actual transfers. Okay, not requests. I'll send you the correct slides. So Germany has found 75,000 people and has managed to send back to Italy less than 10,000, 8,000. Okay. France, the same. Switzerland, a bit more compared to where they are, but not so much. Austria, a bit more, but on very small numbers. And even Sweden. So as you can see, the system is broken. It's true, but it's not unfavoring Italy. The estimates that, so if you sum this up, they go to 300,000. We estimate at ISPI that out of almost 1 million people who arrived to Italy between 2011 and today, 600,000 have left the country. About half of them have been found by France, Germany, and so on, and they managed to say, okay, they came from Italy, because of course, if there is no fingerprint, they cannot do anything. So about 300,000, and out of these, only 30,000 have been sent back to Italy. So 5% of the 600,000 who managed to escape have been brought back, okay, to Italy. The others, no idea. I mean, they are, of course, elsewhere in Europe. So the system is broken, but it is broken in a way that still facilitates passage if you manage, right, to get to another country, to move to another country. It still facilitates you to stay there. And informally, of course, the Italian government cannot say this, and sometimes they don't even know that. But informally, this is a good system for Italy because it allows a lot of redistribution compared to the only formal system that we agreed upon in 2015, which was we would relocate 35,000 people, right? So less than 5% again than what we relocated through this informal system. So I'll stop here just to show you this is dysfunctional. Of course, this is illegal. The other countries can say to Italy, well, you're not respecting the pact and so on. But in the end, it works because the rules of the Dublin system have this kind of escape clause of 12 months. And in the end, returns are not done. So actual transfers back to Italy do not occur, which means that in the end, the migrants still self-relocate across Europe. So I'll stop here just to show you how hard it is, but still also why Italy as well thinks that this could be a suboptimal, but still a solution, right? So if no relocation is there, well, we'll still continue to let people go.
Matteo, a last comment from my side after I give the floor to the student. But the people apply for international protection, but only 60 or 50% of them get accepted because they don't obtain the international protection. This means that probably they are not real asylum seekers.
Yeah. Totally.
And so this channel is probably used by people that would like to arrive for work, for other reasons. And this is something that overcharged the system of relocation, the asylum seal, that should be solved before.
It's hard. I mean, as you can imagine, we estimated about half of those who arrived did not even apply for asylum over the past 3 years. Usually they arrived and applied for asylum. And then as the system got a bit overburdened and it was better not to apply for asylum because otherwise you were fingerprinted, right? They started not to do it. So about half do not apply. So which means that out of those who apply, about half get protected. So just 1/4 get protected out of those who arrive by sea. So even less, right? And now, given that humanitarian protection is a bit less used, even less than that are protected in Italy. So yes, these are mixed migration flows. Even those who get protected, they might have many other reasons to get to Italy and have crossed other countries to get to Italy. Of course, in Africa, most of them do not offer asylum opportunities as well as we do. But if you come from the Balkan route, of course, you've crossed Greece. You've even sometimes crossed, for sure, you've crossed Slovenia. Sometimes you even have crossed Austria and then came back here. So it's obvious that there are different reasons, there are different channels, and even just different willingness by migrants. Also, but we also have to remember this is just the easiest way for them to get regularized. If they are not, they will become irregulars in Italy. We know that the return system is broken as well. After several attempts, it's almost impossible. I mean, we know, just to give you the sense of the scale of the problem, we have about, let's say, 500,000 irregular migrants right now in Italy, and we return 6,000 of them each year, which means that it takes almost a century to return them all, even if no other regular arrivals arrive. So that's why, Alessandra, as you were saying, in the end, Italy, as well as many other countries in Europe, resorts to regularizations, mass regularization of migrants, if they work, in order to solve this problem that, of course, cannot be solved just through returns alone.
Yes.
Sorry, this was the slide for temporary protection because, of course, it's a very different way to deal with this, but also a very, very different emergential and political way to deal with this crisis that is not feasible, we know, with others. But let me just show you this. All Ukrainians have had this right from the start. They could even choose the country in Europe where they wanted to go. They self-relocated. Most of them stayed in Poland. Many of them went to Germany. A few of them came to Italy, less than we expected. But given, I mean, they still have these rights and enjoy these rights, even if they don't apply for any protection whatsoever. But remember, this is also temporary, which means that after 2 years or maybe 3 years, if this gets prolonged, they will be asked to go back home, right? Unless they do it differently and they apply for international protection in Italy, for instance, and so then they might become refugees. Okay, but this is a different channel, different mechanism. And even though we would like to see this applied to everyone, maybe if you are, humanitarian and so on, politically, but also maybe I would say bureaucratically, it would be very, very, quite impossible to do this for everyone.
Yes. Yes, I understand that. Do you have any question? You see, the Carol Vaudin. Okay, Carol, could you switch off your microphone?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question
If you want to switch off also your video, so
yes,
we can also see you.
Okay, here we go. Okay, my question is, so we said that relocating is better dealt with through this mechanism, which is not effective, but it is good for Italy. And that oftentimes it happens that they also relocate themselves illegally, even though we know it is not ideal. And we also said that sending them back, as it is oftentimes proposed, is not a real solution. But how do we deal with those many migrants in a way which is respectful both of them and their person, and not leaving them for years, maybe awaiting protection and for the declaration of asylum, sorry. How do we deal with it in a coherent and possibly humanitarian good way?
Matteo, to you the answer.
Okay, I get it. No, of course, I don't have any magic wands. I mean, it's hard to single out different, but there are, there is a mix of policies that might assuage some problems, but never do, never hide the fact that India and Italy is in the center of the Mediterranean and is a peninsula that stretches towards North Africa. So even if we try to do something that, for instance, takes away the burden from the asylum system by opening up some regular channels for labor that are more feasible for them, still, I would expect many of those who are now departing still to depart because they would not be selected by this system. Okay, the selection is a bit different. So you might have more regular channels or legal channels to get into labor, and I think that Italy, for instance, has very low regular channels for labor that it's not seasonal. Alessandra knows this, but also low skilled, and especially these ones are those who then try to come here irregularly, but the ones that try to come here irregularly are also those who are most likely to survive the route. So they are usually males, young males. I mean, they are different from, they're not selected for the skills, but for the fact that they can survive. And also they actually give up a few years of education. They accumulate trauma along the route. So that's not great at all. That is totally efficient, even for Italy. Once the person gets there, he or she, but mostly he, is going to be most likely more violent, less likely to be integrated, and so on, just because they made this journey. So that's part of the problem. But it's hard to say that even opening up legal routes would significantly reduce these irregular arrivals, right? It's not so easy to understand whether these are so much overlapping, So for instance, Italy could say, I will take in, I don't know, let's say 10,000 Gambians each year, okay? Who are they? Are they the same that would then attempt the route and not attempt it? After we don't know yet, because actually we don't have enough places. Just to give you a sense of the scale, today, for instance, we have about 35,000 places each year for non-seasonal, non-EU arrivals. Out of these, some of them are high skilled, so not the ones that we are interested in. Some of them are for countries that are not along the route, because we select even countries, right? Like the Philippines, Bangladesh, and so on. And some of them just because they are our friends. And so it shrinks constantly, right? The number of places opened up for legal labor migration shrinks. And as Professor Venturini knows better than me, because I remember a graph from her, I guess, the problem with migration today in Italy is that most of that is family reunification. Some of that is asylum. Very little of that is labor. And let me just show you what we know from this, right? If you enter, sorry, this is employment rates of non-EU citizens in EU countries by reason of migration. Sorry if this is in Italian, but this is work-related, family reasons, refuge. And this is years since first arrival to the EU, less than 5 to 9, and so on. So if you come from labor, you can see your employment rate. Well, it actually slightly declines over time, and it stays high. While in order to catch up, the refugee reasons, it takes almost 10 years or even more. So it's not ideal that you enter through refuge and then try to find work, because it will stay irregular for more times and so on. And yet we know this problem. We don't have a sustainable solution, given that we do not open up regular channels. I think that's the start. It would underburden the asylum system. At the same time, I don't think it will solve the problem at all throughout just this channel. So again, sorry, a mixed bag of a response, but I don't have.
No, but Carol, this is a very important question, because this is based on what the association, in general private, do to take care of the people during the phase of the asylum demand, which is 1 year. In general, they apply for the recognition of international protection, and this phase, at least for the first result, for the first answer, is more or less 1 year, 6 months, 1 year.
Even 2 years sometimes.
Sometimes also 2 years, and this depends what they're doing. You see, the volunteer, the association of the third sector, which has in charge migrants, they're in general humanitarian association. People with a lot of background for humanitarian, foreign culture, and so on, but very little background on the labor market, how the labor market works, and so on. One of the more successful programs in Torino was managed by the demand. That means an agency received from Fincantieri the demand. They wanted to hire 20 plumbers. No, plumbers no, it's not plumbers, saldatori. Come si dice saldatori?
Welders.
Welder. So, HR manager retired who was working with the Salesiani and who knows this agency made the deal, organized from the Salesiani a course for welder. These 20 became 50. They were all trained. They were all asylum seeker in this camp. They were trained. Now they were already working for Fincantieri, which is the big ship company. But this took place because we're not just done by benevolent association or third sector association, because the market entered. And this person who was retired, who knew Salesiani, was doing the bridge from the labor market and so on. And some of these have been denied the international protection because they were waiting for an international protection, but they had the job offer. They were able to stay without problem. But you see, the problem is to put together this type of institution and services and a traditional labor market matching. Italy does not have a good labor market matching agency. So while in Germany, you have a very good labor market matching agency, and also the education is done jointly with the firm. So you do a technical school, and the specialization on which you are trained is the one in demand in the company. For instance, they want plumber, they want welders, but they want 10 plumber and 20 welders, and they train 20 welders and 10 plumbers. You see, in Italy, the education is a supply phenomenon. So you should go to the agency of the Unione Industriali. They have a training company in Torino, but they train the people that's already been hired. So it's not a supply side policy. It's just on the job training, but given that the company has, for instance, 4 Romanian, 3 Moldovan, 3 Albanian, they want to shift them to a different type of machine, and they ask the Associazione Industriale, the professional association, to train their workers, and the employer is paying. So they have already tried the employees in low skill position. They want to upgrade them. You see, the problem is that Italy does not have a job matching agency which put together supply and demand and train people for the market. But this is the problem of education. In general, the education is considered a supply policy and not just a demand policy. For instance, you study international relationship. You will know that you will find a job? No? Because this is a supply. You have to find your job. That could be not an international relationship, it can be someplace else. You learn things and this can be helpful. But sometimes, especially for this manual work, they're not helpful because there is no demand. This is a classic example at school. For instance, you are too young, but when I was young, there was a course in Pisa in programmatori elettronici. So they were the computer. They had people that was building the program. Now we have Word, Stata, Internet, Excel. There are packages where a person, just one programmatore electronico, made the package, everybody used it. Instead, before each company needed one. And this person, given the arrival of all these packages, was obliged to retrain themselves because what they were learning was useless. So this is the problem of the labor market in general, in addition for foreigners.
Of course, so language and so on. Actually, now we have to train foreigners with ChatGPT so that we can write essays without using data, so or collecting it. So no, I'm joking, but it's of course the problem with reskilling and retraining. Of course, the active labor market policies that are always absent in Italy do not help Italians and do not help foreigners as well. But this is structure, right? Throughout the EU, we have this problem of low entrance in the labor market for refugees, and then it becomes compounded in Italy, for instance, by what Professor Turini told you. So hard, an inefficient active labor market policy, even when we introduced this kind of, for instance, reddito di cittadinanza, which was supposed to be the essential part of of an entrance,
Yes.
active labor market policy part, which never came into being for real in the end. So yes, it's not necessarily just a refugee problem, but for sure, as you can see, those who enter with work, they stay in work because they already have a job offer, or they get regularized because they have a job offer. And in other cases, it's harder. So yeah, it's we know the problem. We know there are partial solutions. I don't think there will ever be perfect solutions. I think we will still be stuck with regularizations of those who come, even if they were
Absolutely.
not. Yeah, but in the end, it's okay if the system understands it and if politics does not get too much into it. But of course, given that we know that migration usually is quite a toxic, but also good argument to make to score cheap points, we do not usually get into the real problems and real challenges that are actually many. And maybe we are stuck. Sorry, I let myself go in this case, but we're stuck with NGOs when the problem is total arrivals and not just NGOs. Okay, so that small percentage of the problem, instead of looking at the moon, we look at the finger.
Yes. And for example, we don't even know if the data in the labor market data do not report if you are, they report your nationality sometimes, but in general, they don't report if you enter as asylum seeker or labor market or family unified member. And in this way, we are enabled to understand if the asylum seeker has a better performance than the other. You can just use the nationality, but you should have also the level of education, because otherwise you compare peach and apple, not people the same. So I would say that this is not to discuss the quality of the people that enter, but to discuss the integration policy that had been used. The efficiency of the integration policy has been used. So, any questions? No. Okay. Your lecture was so exhaustive that the students were very happy. Matteo, we thank you a lot. I will circulate the slide to the student, if you don't mind, if you send them to me. And I will send you the video before posting it on the web of the chair. on the YouTube section of the web of the chair. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. On my part, thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope to see you soon all.
Thank you so much.
Professor as well. See
I
you.
take off
Bye-bye.
recording. Interrompi the recording.